Welcome to Elemental Energy, the podcast where we discuss how to simplify decarbonization. Here, we will introduce emerging low-carbon energy technologies and give you insight on how to navigate and support the evolving energy landscape. It is our goal to develop content to give you confidence to help transition the market and make low-carbon energy reliable and affordable. I'm your host, Marcia Leonard. On today's episode of Elemental Energy, we're going to be discussing energy security. Now, the reason this whole topic really excited me and made me curious was because there were a couple of recent releases and articles about how the introduction of renewables would help strengthen our energy security. Well, when I went to go learn, because I was starting to develop my own value propositions about why we should continue to support renewables, I found out that there are multiple definitions of energy security. The IEA, or the International Energy Agency, describes energy security as the state of having a reliable and affordable supply of energy. However, the DOE, or the Department of Energy, describes energy security a bit differently. It actually refers to protection and support of the nation's current and future energy infrastructure through grid resiliency and reliability. So I really wanted to bring in a couple of subject matter experts on both of these definitions. I happened to find one to talk about the second version of energy security, about the protection of the infrastructure itself. So today I'm very excited to introduce Paul Robinson. Paul, welcome to Elemental Energy.
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. Thank you for having me.
So, Paul, please go ahead and introduce yourself and give us your background of how you even came into supporting energy security.
Sure, Marcia. Well, I've had the great honor and privilege of serving as the chief of the Energy Division at the Huntsville Center, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, called USACE. And I did that, it was almost about a decade that I got that opportunity to do that. And so I saw energy from, very, when you think of energy efficiency projects and kind of, one-dimensional projects to its evolution into what is really a much more complex energy security apparatus, and we can describe that. But, just to give you a little context on USACE and the way that they operate, you have, across the globe, 40 some odd different districts, and those districts execute either civil works and or military programs. Some of them have military programs, but not a civil works. And military programs is really a lot of your horizontal, vertical type of construction. And a district is bound by a certain region, by a certain district. It's a regional organization. For instance, you might have, like in Texas, the Fort Worth district, right? And it'll have Texas and Oklahoma and have some other parts out there. And so they're confined regionally. The organization at Huntsville is very different. It's a global business that specializes in, or its programs are what is considered specialized type programs that is not really typically done across the other districts. Now, we'll coordinate with other districts to execute work, and they'll partner with us in that process, but we have that global mandate. And so energy is actually one of them. And the division I led did about $250 million in obligations every year across 9 program areas in energy, and then an additional $300 million or so in capital investments through performance contracting. And so a lot of the way that the federal government executes energy is through performance contracting. And a lot of that is, budgets, right? We don't have a lot of money. A lot of money goes to concentrating on the warfighter. And so we use performance contracting, or what is called alternative financing, using other people's money, right, and generating savings to execute projects. So it was a very unique vantage point that I had the opportunity to serve in, probably one of a handful of folks who really got to see energy from a very, very holistic view across the broad spectrum, whether it was renewable energy, energy efficiency, right, net zero, sustainability, distributed resources, you name it. We did that kind of work. And because we were the Corps of Engineers, we really supported across the various aspects across the entire federal government. So it wasn't just the Army that we did work for, right? So I supported the Office of Energy Assurance and helped them establish the Office of Energy Assurance in the Air Force. And we did a lot of projects, CSPC, UESC type projects with DOE or GSA. So we were involved across the gamut. And it was, I think an argument can certainly be made that that particular organization at Huntsville really served as a crossroads for energy execution across the nation. It was a reimbursable business, probably as close to the private sector that a government organization could get. And it was certainly a scalable business because customers didn't have to come to us. They could go elsewhere. They could do it within their own service or organization. They didn't have to come to us, but they did. And so it was a great vantage point to see that. And then really what that helped me do is to see things holistically and to see the evolution of the energy space from, what was pursuit of a renewable energy goal back in those days to a pivot into energy security and resilience of what all that entails, right? And because in the energy industry, private sector through performance contracting is so closely tied to the federal space in this partnership, it certainly gave me an opportunity to understand the private side of things and the challenges that they face. And in reality, they're very similar. There's a lot of similarity to the challenges that are faced there. So that's a little bit of my background. That's how I got to know energy. I love, I love doing it, very passionate about it. And it is one of the most important things we can be doing, especially as we look at the times today and where we are and where things are going. It is very important at the end of the day to have our focus on energy security and really securing our installations for the future.
Oh, that's an amazing journey to have been able to see that holistic view of how energy. And one thing that you introduced to me that I didn't really understand was the concept of energy security being surrounding is how we actually keep our energy grids up in case of, future attacks or anything like that. And being a wife of a service member, an active duty service member, it really struck home with me that I hadn't even thought of that portion of energy security. So will you go ahead and give us your exact definition of what you see energy security being?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, and there's so many, discussions about, resilience and security, and we'll certainly talk a little bit about the two and how they interoperate in my mind. But to me, I think the key phrase is assured access, right? We want assured access to, right, and our ability to secure energy resources, and I'm taking that from a DoD angle. When you look at energy security, to me, it really emanated from the, defense federal space, because there is a need, right, to secure what we have because our mission is about the national defense. And so it is about having that assured access. More simply, I like to, think of it, hey, we've got to ensure that our bases remain operational, right, and can perform its mission in the event of bad things, whether it's a bad actor, whether it's a natural disaster. We want to ensure that we can maintain the mission of our national defense. And so to me, that's plainly what it is. It's just having that, assured access to our resources so that we can maintain continuity.
So, Paul, what has the electrification movement, the decarbonization movement done to this space?
Yeah, well, I think it's helped it a lot. I mean, I when I look at, the continued move towards energy and renewable energy, if you look at the last couple of years, and legislation that's been passed, there's legislation now that's bringing in, some funding for the space. And that's very important, because when you look at energy, the way we executed energy in the federal government, a lot of it, 85% of it is driven by performance contracting. We had, we did about a third of that performance contracting over a 8-year period of time. So it was all driven there. So now we have, some funding that would come that focuses in the energy space, and some of it is focused towards building distributed resources. And to me, that is a really good thing. Where I think there is some challenges, when you look at energy security and resilience and some of the, confusion that exists with what is it and how does it differ from resilience and all of this stuff, I would say energy security is probably, of all the things energy, the most important thing that sits in front of us today based on the times that we live. Yet it is, I would tell you, mainstream media, or just the media in general, when they look at energy, I think when we look at where we are today, a lot of people think of climate action or climate action change or ESG, and we have so many different things going on in the energy space that I think it's very easy to lose sight of, what I would consider the most important thing we ought to be doing going forward. I think that in the things that we do, there's certainly, certainly it benefits climate change. Certainly that, certainly it has impact on ESG, and it does things to advance those components of energy. But energy security is probably a smaller, subset, if you will, of all of these things that are happening, especially when it comes to climate change, that I think it's very easy for us to, lose sight of what is the most important thing we ought to be doing. I think that, it's very easy to conflate or to confuse, hey, we've got this climate change thing, we're doing this, then forget that, hey, the reason that we're really truly doing this is to secure our installations so that we can maintain our mission going forward, and defend the United States. And so, we can lose track of that. And so to me, it's not the same thing. It's just like, just to give you an analogy, when you do an energy efficiency project, say for instance, we did a HVAC retrograde, we brought in energy efficient HVAC, and now we're yielding savings, right? That thought process in that type of project is much different than the thought process that you would have in executing an energy security and resilience project that would have many layers to it, that you have a more holistic thought process that's necessary to actually execute that project. So it's, it is energy. Both of them are energy, but they're two very different ways of thinking about energy or how we execute. And it's different processes of thought. And that is, I think, the challenge. One of the big challenges, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges that exist, but that is one of the big challenges, is that it is a paradigm shift. And it is different in the way we have to think about things.
Hopefully everybody listening right about now is thinking to themselves, wow, yeah, this is a totally different definition of energy security than what I had originally had. And you can see why this was such a confusing topic for me when I started to see people saying renewables will bolster energy security. So, Paul, when it comes down to that grid reliance and stability because of this electrification movement, what are some things that we're actually looking at doing in order to bolster that grid reliance and stability to make sure that we have the electric security portion of things?
Okay, so real quick, March, if I may just go back, I had just one quick thought to the last one. When you look at the pivot to security and resilience, because that pivot happened around the 2018, 2019. So we went from pursuing a renewable energy goal, as you mentioned, right, to now energy security resilience. Well, if you look at the starting in 2018 with the National Defense Strategy, that really said, hey, we need to look at, our homeland is no longer the sanctuary that we thought that it was, or that it is, and we need to protect it. But it was very clear through the National Defense Authorization Act 2019 that the focus right, of the defense establishment, and DoD energy policy was energy security, right, and resilience, and that was the focus. And so that's, that just kind of gets back to, yes, renewable energy is important, but it's not the end all, it's a means to an end, right? And so that was just one quick salient point that I wanted to make on that.
So just to even clarify that further for everybody is it doesn't matter where the energy comes from, if it's a carbon based or a fossil fuel based energy source, in order to produce power at that time, we're going to do whatever it takes to make sure that our nation is secure in how we actually have energy. That's safe to say, right?
Yeah, it's a great point, right? Because, I'm all about, renewable energy and using that as a gap, as a bridge, if you will, to the gap, right? So we've operated on fossil fuels. We want to move to other sources, right? That are more friendly, right? Eco-friendly. And we've got to do that. And I think that, every step that we take to do this is a step in the right direction, but it doesn't mean, also in my mind, that we jump off the cliff, right, and do things that would impact us in very negative ways. And so when you build a system, and when you look at energy security, it's not about the renewable energy resource, it's about the security, right? And so if it makes economic sense to, put in a natural gas energy source, because that in that particular area, that's what makes economic sense, then we do that. And then we build around it and we provide the energy security that we want. So, we've got to move in that, in the direction of, hey, we do want to move towards secure renewable energy and these type of things, but we also want to do it smart.
So, Paul, talking about the movement towards how we make our grid more resilient, one of the questions that the reason this whole topic of energy security got me stirring as well is because I was driving and I was looking at all of our power lines and I was looking at all of the infrastructure for all this electrification, and it seems so unprotected. And it seems like it's very easy to attack, if that would be the right terminology, but like it seems that it's easy to take down. So like what is that really one of our greatest weaknesses, is that our infrastructure is possibly, at risk? Or what are some of the greatest weaknesses surrounding our current energy systems?
Yeah, so, when I look at weaknesses, I obviously think of the headwinds that face us, and there are many headwinds, and I don't want to, I'm not going to attempt to go through all of them, but I want to hit on some that I think are very important. But the first thing that I would tell you is that, our weaknesses are not an issue of technology. And in my opinion, they're not an issue of our ability to necessarily bring things together, because I think that if focused to do so, we can certainly do so, and the technology already exists. Now, that doesn't mean, this is a space that's evolving rapidly, and so a smart person would say, hey, we recognize this is evolving rapidly, and we want to do things to bring in new technologies and infuse our solutions with the best, the latest and greatest. But in terms of building energy security and resilience today, there's not a missing technological piece, if you will. So the headwinds really are where our weaknesses lie. And let me describe those a little bit. The first one is the change in paradigm that I kind of hinted at. When we look at energy security, we're talking about a systems of systems approach that is complex. You're not just looking at a distributed energy resource. You're looking at, the cyber behind it. You're looking at the big data and behind that, right? You're looking at industrial control systems and how they're supposed to interoperate. You're looking at the communications backbone. And, traditionally when we did energy projects, again, there were kind of, hey, it's an energy efficiency project. It's just replacing HVAC and it's pretty straightforward and it's simple. But this direction that we have to building security requires you to, I think it requires a couple of things. A lot of innovation, right? A lot of out of the box thinking and imagination, and understanding the big picture and being very holistic about that, because the system in itself is holistic. If you look at this, and the proof of that really at the end of the day is if you look at energy projects that we did in the latter part of when I served as a chief there, were much larger in scale and dollar value than the ones that we had in the past. And even the ones in the past at that time were considered large projects. And they were really dwarfed by the projects that we had towards the end. So you have this change in paradigm, and it lends itself to a variety of different principles that people didn't necessarily think about. Modularity, right? The principles of interoperability and scalability and repeatability, right? The need to look at, when we're trying to derive a solution, to look at system architectures, right? And helping, we created a system architecture for high voltage and medium voltage distributed energy systems when we were there that, it's called a DODAF, that looks at all the levels, right? It brings in defense in depth principles. In other words, the cybersecurity portion of it, right? Levels 1 through 6. And it looks at those levels. And what I'm trying to get at is that what it's giving you, it's giving you a roadmap, if you will, on how to derive an energy security and resilience solution that is very complex, that is very easy to miss important pieces to. And so, if you're then thinking, okay, we have to be interoperable, we want to do this in such a way that it's repeatable, right? We have this architectural framework that we're operating against, right? That's helping us navigate and look through the different pieces that we have to deliver this solution. That is a very, very different way of thinking through things than we did in the past. And it's more involved. And so that's number one, is that change in paradigm. The second one is this, rapidly evolving space, right? Because it's evolving rapidly, we need to be out with the old and in with the new, right? I think in any place and any time that you have a paradigm change, it's disruptive. And when it's disruptive, it means that it'll have impacts across other programs that you have. And I think there's a natural inclination by us all to protect that, right? Especially if it's making you a lot of money and it's a cash cow or whatever. There's a propensity to want to protect that. But we have to be very careful, because in a rapidly evolving space like that, your desire to protect something that may be obsolete very, very soon will sacrifice your future. And so you have to be nimble, right, and on your feet. And one of the things that I saw in my time was, we have to establish better mechanisms on how we advance our innovations and our applied research into mainstream execution. I was in the execution side of the business, right? And we had a tremendous amount of impact on, and influence on policy and where we need to go and what we need to do. But you never saw this clear linkage, right, between our ability to take innovations, right, and bring those innovations to bear in actual execution. And so that's a thing where we have to look and say, how do we evolve this, right? How do we evolve this so we can bring the best of what we have and bring it in very quickly into our solutions? So that's the second one of those. The third one is organizing for success, right? So I gave a presentation on this about 2 years ago at a conference, because nobody had really ever talked about it. We talk about, hey, what is energy security and resilience? What do we need to do? We talk about all these things, energy, but we don't talk about the organization in and of itself. And I would argue that in a paradigm change like this, where you're dealing with complexities in a systems to systems way, you need a higher order of synchronization. And so the substance of my presentation was, we need to look at the enterprise holistically. And we need to consider how all the elements within that enterprise that support the energy infrastructure or the energy apparatus complement one another, right? How does research and development complement the execution side? How does the execution side help the policy side? And how does this wheel work? And how do we organize ourselves in such a way that it moves and it moves quickly, right? So that we can keep up with the rapid space and we can align ourselves to the changing paradigm. And so I think that, that is a very important. The more I think about it, the more important I think that piece has become. We cannot be competing against one another, right? And I think that you and I had that conversation where if you look at the energy industry, it's fragmented and it's highly fragmented, right? And if you look at the commercial side, the private side, right? You've got these regional enclaves and co-ops and all. And so there's
different.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so that communication, right, that I'm kind of talking to here, and what's needed for this changing paradigm, our organization is juxtaposed to it. And we have to make those alignments. So that's number 3. Number 4, education. I'll keep it simple. I don't know any business, whether it's on the government side or on the private side, that if you don't have education as a key component of what you do in the energy space, I just don't know how you survive. I mean, it was constant. To me, it's a 24/7, always on. There's never enough education that you can give to people about energy going forward and what you need to do so they can understand it, because it is very complex. And then the other one here I'd like to kind of hit on, and it's supportive of other items that go along this line, is this OT versus IT, right? Information technology versus operational technology, right? An example of that is, when you look at cybersecurity, right? And how we do cybersecurity, the focus, right, and the emphasis is always on the IT side, right? So I talked about defense in depth, and you have all this layering in cybersecurity, right? So when you look at the IT side of it, right, that's at the upper end, right? But when you go down to the very lower end, that's when you get down to the devices, the mechanical devices, the actuators, those kind of things. That's operational technology, right? Up here is the information technology. And if you look at the way that we've structured, right, our organizations, they're IT centric, right? Our cybersecurity is IT centric. The word operational technology, I hadn't heard it till it was 2018, 2019, right? I mean, you just didn't hear of it. Yet, when you look at, hacks to our systems, right, and how people get in, a lot of times, and more often than not, they get in through the mechanical side of things, right, at the very lowest levels, and we're not providing the security that we need, right, the cybersecurity that we need across all levels of the system, right? And so, I bring that up because we focused on IT instead of understanding that there is an OT component that's very huge, right? And then we have these battles about who owns the infrastructure, right? And we're kind of fighting amongst each other about the infrastructure, when in reality, we all need to come together, right, to understand what these challenges are so that we can make the adaptations that we need to move this thing and progress it forward in very bold ways. So my message here is that our weaknesses, right, are not necessarily in the technologies and leases, but ourselves. It's in ourselves, right? To me, they can be, what's that saying? We have seen the enemy, but it is us, right? And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, the way that we've structured, the way that we've had old systems, the way that we've done things in a changing environment, if we don't make those changes, then we're the ones that are making, it's self-inflicted wounds that we make that prevent us or inhibit us from really moving boldly forward. So that's kind of the way I see weaknesses as it comes to energy systems.
That's amazing. I think I have a perfect simplification of your IT and OT. A prime example in the operational technology failure for cybersecurity. We were recently in Vegas in September for RE Plus, and I used my debit card at one of the ATMs. This was the time that MGM had a complete cyber attack,
Mhm.
and who knows how they got into it, but my credit card was compromised. My debit card was compromised along with several other colleagues and friends who are in this area. But it was all about the operational technology that you're talking about versus the actual IT side of things. So I thought it was a really
Yes.
interesting comparison to it.
Yeah, it is, and I keep very close tabs on the space. And it's interesting because I know some real experts in the OT space, and they're very vocal, and I see it out there, and it's a constant, there's a constant reaffirmation of the importance of operational technology. I was involved in I don't know if you've ever heard of it, FedTech, but it's an organization that helps startups, especially that are wanting to do work in the federal government. So I kind of served as a business mentor and advisor, and one of them was to connect me with a company that actually does work in this OT level 1, level 2, and it's really amazing the products that they have. And we've been trying to help them get visible, right, within the federal structure. But it is it's kind of funny because we've been talking cybersecurity for years, right? We talk about it and we talk about it, and yeah, we got the cybersecurity. But if you remember the Home Depot hack years and years ago, right? They got in through some mechanical system, right? In some way, somehow they traced itself down to the cash register some way. So protecting our system thoroughly and comprehensive is an important part. And so I hope that kind of helps people see how important all these different parts and pieces are, and how important it is that you have to think through at the very beginning, right? It's not an afterthought anymore. Cybersecurity is not an afterthought. Data is not an afterthought. You have to think through these things very early on, and you have to structure yourself in such a way, right, that you feel, really good about what you're creating here to give you the security that you want.
So Paul, I really do think I could have this conversation all day with you because I still have so many questions in the back of my head, like AI and nuclear and, the power infrastructure itself on what to do. But I like to keep them down to about 30 minutes or so. And I want to get with you on a part 2 of this once I learn a
Right.
little bit more. But is there anything that you and I did not cover when it comes down to understanding energy security that you think everybody needs to be made aware of when we're talking about the definition that you and I just went through?
Yeah. So I want to give. I think I'll turn. I can end this with, and we might have missed it in the conversation, which is the resilience piece of this, right? And what that means to me. So how do you differentiate between the two? Because the way I look at them is I look at them as overlapping circles, if you will. They have distinctions within each, but there's an overlap, if you will. Right. So I like to think of resilience. I like to look at a person, right? So if you're a resilient person, what does that mean? Right. It means that you can take a blow, right? And you can get yourself up, bounce back, right, and dust yourself off. That's ultimately what it is. And so, when you look at resilience and you look at the definition, it's really the ability to avoid, prepare, right, minimize, adapt, and recover from, an incident. And so I like to put it in very simplistic terms when I had created a brief years and years ago. And to me, it's all about flexibility, right, and the ability to recover quickly, right? And so it's about bouncing back. And that's what it is. And you and I had spoken to, and I wanted to kind of give an example of, because, if you have resilience, do you have energy security, right? And I think this example that I give will kind of enlighten a little bit on that. So we're talking about the 10 megawatt solar at Redstone Arsenal, right? So we put in a 10 megawatt solar, and so the question is, well, do you have resilience there? And I would argue with you that the answer is yes, of course. So you've now got a system that you didn't have before. So you have a new flexibility and maybe some new ability to do some things that maybe you couldn't in the past, and you have a redundancy. And so you have a measure, right? And we can argue what that measure is, but we have a measure of resilience, right? But what if, right, we lost power, lost the national grid, right? And this particular array, is tied into the national grid, and its inverters are. And so it goes down. Well, your solar array goes down with it. So, this is an example of how we have a resilience measure, but we don't necessarily have energy security, right? Now, let's just say we take that same system and we say, well, let's add a microgrid to that, right? So now and the microgrid, by the way, a distributed resource, is what I would consider a resilient feature. So now you're adding another resilient feature to the resilient feature that you had. And now you have the ability, if you will, to move that energy around, right? We can isolate that energy. We have much more control over what we do and how we do it. And so the question then becomes, do you have resilience? Certainly. Do you have energy security? And I would say, well, yes, you have a measure of energy security because you can isolate yourself. The power goes down and you can still operate. And so now I like it called stacking resilient features, right? You've stacked a couple of resilient features and through it have given yourself and enabled yourself to have a measure of energy security, right? But now let's take that one more step. Now let's say that when we created this microgrid, we decided from a communications aspect that we were going to tie its communications directly to the Army backbone, right? And let's just say that Army backbone got hacked, right? And because it got hacked, right, the microgrid, right, and its features, say they go down, right? And say that they go down for 10 days or 14 days, right? And so my question is, was the mission of the installation impacted? Could it conduct its mission? And if the answer is no, well, then you might have had these resilient features, right? But you didn't have energy security resilience, or you didn't have the energy security, right? But now let's say that you take that and say, well, why don't we put in an OTSDN network in a closed restricted loop and say that, they operate independently. And if an OTSDN network is what I would call a super clean, right, communications apparatus or structure, right, that you control what digits go in and out of that network and you specify and you have control. It's not like the internet that's just flowing, information across a highway, right? Here now you've restricted control. And so now you are adding yet again another resilient feature in an OTS network that's closed restricted. And now you're preventing yourself from being hacked, right? And so my point there is that, the more features that you bring into that system, right, you're enabling and you're giving yourself, ultimately, there comes a threshold where you have the security, the energy security that you want. And that's what makes this this is what makes it a very, complex undertaking, because you have to consider these things very early on. What are the components that we want in an energy security solution? And it spans the gamut. It's just not one resilient feature. It's many. And so, I'd like to think of resilience as a path, right? A means to an end, and energy security more as the end point, right? I mean, we adding all these resilient features that gets us to a point that we have the security and we have that assured access that we want. And so that's kind of how the two overlap, but how they're different, if you will. I hope that's helpful for everybody.
It's extremely helpful, but the question that comes to mind in my mind is, this is so complex. And are there consulting companies out there who are actually helping customers, like larger customers and operators, think about these energy resiliency practices that they need to be building into their infrastructure? Because it sounds like you're doing it for the governmental side, but who's really taking care of that private sector side?
Yeah, it's a good question, Marsh. I think that, I think it all spins back to the fragmented nature of who we are, right? And we have to overcome that. And so you see cyber companies, right? Or you see, distributed energy companies, or we see ESCOs that, like, serve the federal government, that are trying to provide, you know, solutions that the government, wants. But you don't see this holistic component, not yet. And the movement of it is, in my humble opinion, it's slow. It's more, let's put it this way, it's slower than I'm comfortable with. The biggest thing that I think we can do for ourselves, right, is to, we have to look at things for what they are, right? We have to, and to me, the best way to do that is to look at the world, right? And, what's happening in the world. If you look at the last 3 years, I mean, you have to ask yourself some very hard questions, right? And I would argue with you that the need for, we came up with the need to pivot in 2000, 17, 18. That was 7 years ago, 7 years ago. And yeah, we're moving in the direction of, yeah, we need to put microgrids across all our installations. We need to do these type of things, right? But because we have these headwinds that I've kind of discussed, right? And it's a difficult proposition, right? And I think I had mentioned to you that I had seen, about 2 years ago, a documentary from China about their infrastructure, and my jaw just like dropped to the floor when I saw what they were doing in the infrastructure space. Now, I'd be the first one to tell you, okay, they're doing it in such a way that is used to control their people, and that's not the way we ought to do it. But what they're showing you and what they're proving to you is that, you can do it. Now, they're a communist organization, they're a communist nation, right? And they're like, this is the way we're going to do it, and this is the way that it is. And so they have that, right, that they can impose. And, for us, it's a greater challenge because we're a democracy, right? And we want to do things that benefit, the nation and our society and our people. And so it becomes a different challenge, but it is proof that it can be done. And we need to do that, right? And we need to do it. And to be quite honest, in my opinion, it's going to require sacrifice, right? If we are a fractured industry, right, and we have our, kind of our kingdoms and our fiefdoms and our regions and all of this stuff, if we can't come together for the better good of the nation, right, and understanding what's in front of us, what what is reality, what is happening, and what are the actions that we need to take to move ourselves, to advance our nation, to defend our nation. If we don't start looking at that very clear-eyed and saying we need to do some things to move us forward, it's hard, right? But that requires sacrifice. And corporations, we're profit driven, right? We want to maximize our profits. Well, I would argue that maybe in a situation where you're looking out for the better good of the nation, maybe you're not profiting as much, but you're doing some things that together as a group, as a collective, we're actually moving the baton that gets us to a promised land. I always like to tell people, when I think of energy, I don't think of it as just this one little pie that we have to subdivide amongst a bunch of people. I think of this as when we, if we can all come together. I've always said it takes a village. In this particular industry, it takes a village of people to get it done. And, if we can come together, put the differences aside, right, understand what our challenges are, right, make the evolutions that we need to make the sacrifices that we need to make, we can do this. And it can be done. And that's the most important thing to me. And I think that what you see what you've seen in the last 3 years, it really needs to be done like yesterday. To me, it really is an issue that really requires a sense of urgency in how we do it, and what we need to do going forward.
Paul, it has been an absolute pleasure to host you. Thank you for enlightening us on what energy security looks like, because here in the United States, we are so blessed to not be in the same boat as other countries when it comes down to being able to be an energy rich country. And you had some fighting words in there in that last part about, the corporations, maybe not taking as much of a profit in order to help distribute this energy. I mean, it's an amazing shift that we are currently seeing in our energy realm. And I just can't thank you enough for coming and joining. And for everybody listening today, stay happy. Most importantly, stay safe. And we appreciate your time in joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Marcia. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that this has all been helpful to the folks in here.
Yeah. Everyone, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. It is a very interesting stance to see energy security in such differentiated lights. Like I said, when I had originally started down this rabbit hole of energy security, it was to talk about trying to continue to support renewables and the decarbonization effort. And then I recognized that there are two major definitions in energy security, and the media actually portrays the IEA's, or the International Energy Agency's, definition of energy security more often than they do the one that Paul and I just discussed. So I hope that you all took away a different perspective on energy security. And hopefully, if you have some techie loving kids in your life, you can help direct them into the realms of cybersecurity, because this is a huge and budding industry within the power space, particularly. Another thing is I've created a group on LinkedIn called Elemental Energy Simplifying Decarbonization. It's new. It's something I'm trying, but it's a way to get people who are within this group to come in and start connecting with one another. So if you have LinkedIn, join me on the group discussion or find me and connect with me there. So take care.